Welcome, everybody, to Live First Conversations, Episode 9. Just a quick refresher on what Live First Conversations is all about. I started Live Conversations about a year ago, and the purpose of it was to really change the narrative on this conversation about success. There's a lot of talk out there, a lot of information about what it takes to be successful, the right habits, the right rituals, the right mindset, the things that we have to do. This conversation is more about who we want to become and who we want to remain, right? Honoring the person we are and honoring the person that we want to be in the process, in the pursuit of this success. Talking about the things that matter most, like family, our friends, our relationships, love, humanity, the planet. And so, with me today in this conversation is a good friend of mine that we just met not too long ago in Austin. Yehuel, is that how you pronounce it?
Yehuel,
Yehuel.
and in Spanish is Jehuel.
Yehuel. There we go. That's
Yes.
what I was going to get at. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit more difficult for English speakers to use the Spanish version, so I use the Hebrew version.
Do most people usually say Joel? Or
Yeah, Joel, Miguel, they any kind of L that they can find.
Yeah. Well, I know we met in Austin, October, which is a great event. And, I was talking to my wife before this, she's like, who are you interviewing today? And I told her a little bit about you. And I said, this kind of one of the people that you meet and we just started opening up to each other very quickly. It's almost as if we've known each other for years. I say good friend because I feel like even though we've only known each other very little, I feel like we've already gotten to know quite a bit about each other on an intimate level. And so I know that, you mentioned or you shared with me in a previous conversation, you're more of a behind the scenes kind of person. We don't want to put a lot of spotlight in you. So I'm really honored that you're doing this with me and just sharing this conversation because I think it's important, and I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially folks who can relate to your background and where you came from. But tell us a little bit about yourself. Who you are today, kind of profession, what you're doing, and we'll kind of just jump right in.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, definitely don't do a lot of these, but I told myself I'd be doing more. So thank you for leading the charge on that for my own development, for my own growth. So I really appreciate it. A little bit of background on me. Yeah, my parents immigrated from Mexico, Guadalajara, Jalisco, and they came over. I was born here in the U.S. and I've lived in Austin my entire life. So I went to UT here, and I studied political science and business. Somehow ended up in finance. I think what it was, I wanted to, help the world by getting into politics, and then I realized how the sausage is made and how it's a little bit more difficult going that route. So then I said, what actually moves things? And yeah, it's economy, finance. So I ended up becoming an equities and derivatives trader, a trading specialist and at Charles Schwab. I did that for a couple of years, and then eventually transitioned out to when the 2016 Jobs Act was enacted to allow retail investors to get into private markets. We kind of jumped on that, raised some capital, and then went that route, which was pretty interesting to kind of see a nascent industry, being able to form it in real time with other players in the industry and regulators. So that was pretty cool. And then company had to pivot after that. I left shortly after, um, and was doing a little bit of consulting for RIAs and broker dealers. And then my business partner with at EquityNet he was initially wanting to take over the company, and we would go ahead and would help some private equity investors do that. So been doing that for a while now, and essentially just the biggest thing is that I've always been fascinated with access to financial markets, to financial instruments that allows people to really create that generational wealth and really get to where they want to get by having all the resources, tools, and knowledge base to do so. So I think democratized access is super important. So anything that we can build to create that and move towards that allows us to all flourish. So, if what is it, rising tide brings up all ships, it's the same thing here.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's been the drive. And, learning how to better, it's always iterative. We want to be able to move forward and continuously expand and grow how we can better serve ourselves and serve the population.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that. And so you're now acting as a CEO for EquityNet.
Correct.
Yeah. And just for people who may not be familiar with that type of business, in layman terms, what does EquityNet do?
I would say the best way to put it is it's just an it's a marketplace for credit investors to find startups and small businesses to invest in, and vice versa. So it's kind of like a matchmaking service, and it's truly free market structure. Anybody can come up, even if they're just a mom and pop trying to set up a second location in a restaurant that they own, or if it's a biotech company that wants to raise the first 5 million to prove out their model and go through the regulations. So it's open and obviously there are standards that we want to imply for both sides to work.
Thank you for that. And does the name Equity and EquityNet have a double meaning?
Yeah, I guess it was so it's been around for 2 decades. So essentially, it was the first one of the first equity crowdfunding platforms in North America. So the first time that everything started going online, so too did investments start going online. So I was saying, everything was .net and equity net, and it was, all those that net was the word back then. So yeah, that's where it came from. And we don't only do equity, we also do the revenue sharing agreements and things like that.
Very cool. Well, you mentioned you were born in Guadalajara. I was born in Guadalajara too. Well, you weren't born there, but your parents came from Guadalajara. I was born in Guadalajara. We came from over there. I also majored in political science. So I think that was one of the things that kind of
Yeah.
initially kind of hit off our conversation when we met back in October. Tell me about. I mean, you. Let's kind of backtrack a little bit. Before you were a political science major, before you wanted to change the world and ended up in finance, kind of changing certain aspects of the world. Tell me about your upbringing a little bit. Where'd you grow up? How does someone like you, I mean, were your parents in finance? Did you kind of have a pathway and kind of a direct pathway to get into what you're doing? How did that work?
It was definitely not a traditional approach. I'm the first in my family to go to college, and I actually didn't even know what that process looked like. I remember just kind of going to orientation and stuff like that, but just choosing the classes that I wanted to choose and in college, and then realizing that I had to actually follow a curriculum, follow like a specific structure to actually graduate. And I was like, oh man, it would have been nice to know that, like, not 2 years in or a year in. But yeah, my upbringing was interesting, even though we grew up in Guadalajara, um, and Austin. My siblings and I, we would come to Guadalajara every summer as soon as school was over. We'd live there pretty much the entire summer with our grandparents. And my grandparents were pastors for like the families. So my family started their own church. So even though uh, by our culture was a mix of not just Mexican culture, but the culture of the church, which my great grandfather started, and that was a lot different than it's more akin to maybe Jewish culture, kibbutz style stuff where everybody's brothers and sisters and take care of each other. You kind of it's called autoconsumo. You buy and sell and trade with brothers and sisters from the church first. So, but then that creates a level of trust and infrastructure for
But not
a strong
everybody is
community.
related by blood. It's just kind of a close knit community, essentially.
Exactly. So that was very interesting because in the summer I was going to church pretty much 2, 3 times a day, every day, reading the
Did you?
Bible. It was mixed. I mean, I think that it gave me a lot of my values, a lot of my principles, my morals, and how I conduct myself now. Obviously, there's just like life is iterative, so is our consciousness iterative, and it expands and it evolves as we mature and get experience. So yeah, it did give me some foundations and some things that I didn't fully agree with in how I viewed the world. But the one thing that stuck with me was being able to always see your neighbor as yourself and your neighbor's children as your own children. And that was very fundamental.
How did that carry on? So you grew up in a family that was, I want to say, very religious, but it was kind of more than that. And this upbringing that came with you to the States. So was your family growing up with your friends, for example, like did your family kind of see them that way as well? Like everyone around you was basically kind of like family essentially, or
For
how
the
did
be Go ahead.
yeah, how did that transfer over to the States? Because you were kind of living dual lives in Mexico and in the States.
Exactly. That is what it felt like. And being able to kind of switch back and forth does take a toll, because you're kind of one person here, another person there, and not that it was, encouraged to create that separation. Is just that by the nature of things, you kind of had your church friends and then you have your like, regular outside world friends. And yeah, there was a lot of separation that happened just naturally. And where I grew up, it was when we were in Austin. There's an area kind of like where Booker T, Washington, like Section 8 housing, Pleasant Valley. So that kind of area, going from a province in Mexico that's nothing but, you know, people from church to coming back here in Austin, where it's just a totally different experience and having to navigate those. I think it did give me the ability to put myself in different people's shoes as I navigated the world and bring my own understandings from one world to the other and from the other to the first ones. Kind of cross pollination that occurred naturally too.
What was your identity at that point? Like, how did you identify yourself?
When I was a kid,
Yeah.
confused. I identified as confused, trying to search for God and not quite feeling it, and then going into the world and then not quite feeling that either. So, I've always been a big ponder of existence and reality. So even since I was a kid, so it just kind of I observed the world a lot and people and just nature, and then seeing from where we operate and how we operate, and that has helped me really understand and have empathy for a lot of people and different cultures and different backgrounds, which is I think it's just important to have that.
Yeah. So fast forward as you're getting older, you're still, and I can relate a lot to this, by the way. And I don't know if anybody else listening to this. I didn't go back and forth from Mexico to the US, but I heard about how my dad, when they used to live in Mexico, my dad had a high paying, like a business job, you know, and here in the States, we lived very modestly, very humble beginnings. And it was tough for me to kind of identify like as Mexican because there was I mean I know you understand it, but there was just so many other cultures around me, and it wasn't almost like I wasn't allowed to be Mexican where I was at, but it was more like the feeling like I needed to, like, do I need to fit into everybody else, or why aren't they like me? Should I be like them? It was just very confusing.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that went all the way to, it got clearer and clearer as I got older. But now fast forward, you're in high school, you're not really even, sounds like me, you probably weren't even sure about college. Like for me, college wasn't even in my horizon. I wanted to graduate, work in construction, and make $20 an hour or $18 an hour, whatever it was. And how did you end up kind of going that path? I mean, were you always a good student? Did you have like parents that were like super loving and caring and and all that stuff? I mean, how did that shape you into going down that path?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the biggest thing that I can kind of relay here is my father is a baker and my mother is a homemaker. So yeah, that was as far as how we move through the world. Yeah, very very modestly. Like I said, our neighborhood. Like I said, I went from having back and forth from having like a place for people kind of clean up after themselves, like look after each other, to a place that's pretty hostile. So just kind of seeing that. But yeah, I would say for one of the biggest things that occurred to me in my life was our neighborhood was lucky enough to win kind of like a lottery to be able to be bussed out to the more affluent neighborhoods and school districts. So I think it was 20 something of us that went over And yeah, after that, I mean, I was, went from like a middle school and elementary that, were primarily, Black and Hispanic neighborhoods to pretty much 95% white neighborhood at Anderson High. And not only that, but essentially what I realized by going there was just the level, the totally different level of education, of culture, of just, it was just culture shock, totally different experience of the US in, 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 in what I had already kind of experienced. And then now is an even more, you know, um, but that essentially changed the course of my life. Just being able to, and again, that was just luck. And nobody, I didn't do it, or my parents didn't decide to put me in Anderson High. It was just, we were able to, um, you know, get lucky enough to do that. And then I had teachers that cared, that asked me, why do you dress that way? Why do you speak that way? Why you should probably go to college. Um, I was working since I was 13, which is so funny because I was having I was having dinner with my parents and my siblings the other day. They were telling me, I was telling them how, like, yeah, I remember working when I was 13. My father just starts laughing. He's like, you weren't working when you were 13. Get out of here. And I was like, yes, I was, Dad. You actually put me to work at that time.
What were you doing?
I was at a bakery just cleaning the dishes and cleaning around, putting it was a bakery, so we were putting like the bread where it needed to go and the freezers. And I mean, yeah, my father was just like, you should get some kind of skills. He of course did want me. Both of my parents wanted me to go to college and get an education. They definitely pushed for it, but they didn't know what that was. It's just like, you go do that, however that is done, please. And also learn these skills, right? And so, but anyway, this the dinner. My father is laughing, and I look over at my mother. I was like, Mother, can you please tell my father that that was actually true? And she's like, Yep, you put him to work at 13, and that was the best thing actually. I really appreciated him for always wanting us to get skills, but also push ourselves for education, mainly because they're first gen here. They didn't know how to do it, or who to go to or anything. So they were just hoping that we figured it out, which I eventually did. But I didn't go to college right off the bat. I mean, it just kind of like you. I was already working, even in high school, and then as soon as I got off, I started working as well. Didn't think about it till later, which we can go down that rabbit hole.
Let's go down that rabbit hole. I love
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Happened there.
Pretty much, I did a couple of jobs and then I got fired, and then I realized I don't like to get fired. I don't like somebody else being able to dictate that about my life. I just decided to, yeah, I was like, I should probably go to college and do other things that allow me to not have to be beholden to somebody else's emotional whims, or, because everybody's dealing with their own stuff. And unfortunately, we go around kind of projecting that to others and putting that on others. And then also just life, and you know things that make sense, right? And if it makes financial sense to reduce employee count for the survival of the firm or the company, like, that's just, you need to live to another day, right? So you need to be able to do that. So I just decided that I'd rather be on the side where I get to make those decisions, and not the other way around.
Yeah, well, you speak with such empathy and almost like compassion for other people. Like when even like your employers, you didn't like being fired. You didn't like how'd you put it? Being under the whim of other people. Everyone's kind of going through their own thing. Did you always think that way? I mean, were you always that kind of aware of that? People are kind of struggling in their own way, or did you kind of learn that as you got older?
Well, I would say that I definitely didn't have that innately in me. I think just the stages of development of a human and every person, we start off with, egocentric, and then eventually we can expand out onward if we're lucky to, and we're wanting to and desirous enough to do so. But yeah, I would say that all those things that occurred throughout my life were the lessons, were the fodder for the flame of awareness. So the more that you go through heartache, the more that you go through difficult situations, the more that you can generate your own awareness and your own knowing of the totality that is around us, not just our, singular reference point. So it has been an evolution in motion, which I think that we all are given the opportunity to do so. It's just depending on our patterns, depending on our traumas, depending on what has a grip over our psyche and our being. It could be slower for some of us and faster for some of us, depending on what tools, resources are available, and also not only are they available, but can be used and can be taken advantage of because they're there. For example, like going back to the conversation about being able to be bussed out to a better school district. I took advantage of that. I think one other girl that was with me took advantage of that. We both went to college, but everybody else still, from what I remember, it didn't make an effect on them. And unfortunately, they didn't get to go to college and, got caught up in things that weren't the best for their lives or the next generation that they were bringing on. So being able to observe that, and I feel lucky enough and blessed enough to have found, meditation, breath work, those were the first ones. Actually, meditation was the first one, then yoga, then breath work. I think that's like the perfect trifecta for being able to be grounded and rooted in the deepest part of ourselves.
Thanks for sharing that, and I want to dig into that a little bit more a little later. But I want to keep track of this journey that you were on. What would you say, if you can remember, what would you say you were after? I mean, was it simply just I'm tired to get fired? I want to go find I should go to college and maybe make a better life. Did you have a vision for something? Was it something you wanted out of life? I mean, you were young. What was your aspiration at that time, and has it changed?
I think we start off by running away from the things we don't want versus running towards the things we do want. And I think that's just neurologically how, at least depending on our conditions, depending on our upbringing, depending on all these things, which in my case, this is what happened. Then being able to go through that evolution is what I would attribute that to. I think I started it by here's what I don't know what I want. Here's what I don't want. So when I had stuff that happened to me in my life that I didn't want, that was a clear indicator of what I was going to systematically uh, and surgically remove from my life at whatever cost. And then eventually, I think as I got older, I realized that that only is one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is what are you aspiring to? So one of the most favorite things that I always tell people is do things out of inspiration, not desperation.
Mhm.
And whatever helps you get to a state of groundedness and equanimity enough to allow you to make that choice, do that. Some people need to go walk in the park or in the forest for a couple hours or meditate or yoga or just lay out in the field and look at the sky for a couple hours. Anything that lets you get to that point is where you can sync up with that aspect of yourself to then move from inspiration, not desperation, moving towards something versus moving away from something.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. In fact, I just did some of that. The last couple of days, I was in a small little town called Jenner. Spent 2 days, spent 4 days out there, but 2 of those days, I did some hiking. Total of about 10 hours put together. It was nice. Just get out there, and it's being on your own, getting thoughts out, gaining clarity on things that sometimes you didn't even know you needed clarity on. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So you talked about aspiration versus desperation. I think that's well said. So what were you aspiring to before, and has that changed?
Yeah, I think the through line to be completely honest with you has been why am I here? Why are
Mm,
we here? Why any of this? And that has always been at the core of my contemplation and my existence. So as I moved through these phases of and stages of life and existence, that started to solidify more in my being and in my essence. I would say that when we don't know who we are and why we're here and all these things, we just kind of guess at things and we kind of try things. We kind of just jump around blindly looking under things and kind of grasping for anything. And at some point you realize that you probably need to change your strategy and how you approach that. And eventually you start thinking about, okay, maybe there is an aspect of myself that is generative and is creating as I move through time, as I move through my life. And I'm not necessarily beholden to my upbringing, my conditions, my patterns, my traumas, and that I do have a say and I can create the space between that stimulus and the response enough for me to bring forth a version of myself that I would be proud of and that I would feel fulfilled from. And when you have that vision, when you have that, even if it's just a little glimpse of it, when you can bring that back from that reference point in the future to now, you can now inform your now self to start operating in that way that future self you would like to be one day would do and say and act and handle situations. So one of the biggest things that I've seen is in front of me, there's a trillion versions of myself that I could be. And when I can lock in on one that I would say, wow, that guy is inspiring. That guy is who I'm aspiring to be. Then now I know, now I have a beacon, right? And we can continuously kind of echolocate that. We go back and forth. Like, would the person that I want to be, how would they respond in this situation when, whether it's a business situation, whether it's a personal relationship situation, how would they handle this? How would they speak to the other person, knowing that they love them, they respect them, that they want the best for them as well, not just the best for ourselves, because, you know, that's a singular focus versus an omni focus. And being able to do that, you continuously exercise that aspect of yourself over and over again until one day you are that which you aspire to be. You've inspired yourself into being. And I never look at myself or anybody as a static point or a static person. We are continuously becoming over and over again. It's just, are you active in your becoming or are you passive? Are you tremendously aware of all the little aspects of yourself that are moving inside of you, creating you over and over again?
Yeah. Yeah, because we can choose. I mean, if I'm hearing you correctly, and we can choose the direction that we're going, and it's not just the things that we're doing or the material world, but what you're talking about is more kind of internal, what's going on within us, who we are as individuals, how we show up to these places and people and relationships in our world. Moving passively maybe can look like just literally going about the day reacting to things as they happen based on what we know, like the information and the knowledge that we have. How can I react to this? We just naturally respond to it, how we've trained ourselves to respond. And that will then shape future outcomes. And then we just naturally follow that course. Or we can be more proactive, more curious, more creative with this process, like you have, and say, in every instance, as many instances as possible. I'm thinking about this in context of dealing with my kids. Sometimes it's hard for me in every situation to say, all right, how would I deal with this? Sometimes it's more like, no, I said now.
Yep.
But as often as possible, can we stop for a moment before, during, or after and say, how can I approach this differently? How could have I approached this differently? One thing that I've been working on recently is this idea of it's not too late to change things. Going back to versions of myself and seeing how I could change, what I could have done differently. Not reliving it for the sake of having a better outcome, but being more aligned and authentic with who I wanted to be at that time, who I couldn't be in the moment because I just hadn't developed myself to be that person, and bringing my current self into that moment and reliving that almost, right? As a practice, as a way of okay, maybe clearing that trauma. But that's kind of what you're talking about is, and so you've kind of gone through this throughout life. And so what does that have to do? How does that show up? Maybe a better question. How does that show up in the work that you do and in your profession?
Yeah, I think it has everything to do with that because the external is only a reflection of the internal. So if you are at war with yourself, inside yourself, then all you will find is war outside yourself. If you are a ball of stress inside, then all you will create is stress in the world. It's a feedback loop and it's ontological by design. As you feel inside and move inside yourself and understand inside yourself, so too then it informs the external and it moves over and over and over again. So if you are able to lay out the aspects of yourself that are going to be foundational, like the core of who you want to be and how you want to move, and you measure against that every day, every moment, every time. And you're right, it's not always perfect, but that's just the practice, right? I think it's important for us to give ourselves grace and give each other grace. If you want to find grace from others, then you give that grace first,
Hmm.
right? And as you do that, then you will find a compassionate world, right? If an employee messes up, you don't yell at them. You sit with them and say, let's see how this went through. How we can do it better. And don't worry, like, I messed up too, right? Like that allows for growth versus stunted growth, right? Versus now everybody's walking around in fear. Because the energy that we live with is the energy that we infuse in the things that we build and create. And that energy then moves into our services, our products, our people, our employees, their families, customers, our investors. And so that's why to me it's so important to think about it from the core of ourselves out into the world, because it starts from within and that pulsates out into every aspect of our lives. That's why it's so fundamental and so important for me that I treat my employees with respect. I treat my investors with full transparency and respect and honoring them for being able to give me the trust that they give me, right?
Mm.
And being able to be authentically real and honest when things need to be real instead of sweeping stuff under the rug or making it look prettier than it actually is. That is not respectful.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to respect others if we wish to find a respectful world for ourselves too.
Yeah, that's really beautiful what you're talking about. It's almost like there's this implied belief that there's a weakness to this, especially when it comes to business. I would ask you, having founded this company and doing what you're doing for some time, where is the power in this? Is this where's the power and does is what we're talking about, does this limit us in any way in what society would call success and building wealth for whatever reason, whether it's to change the world or for our families, whatever. But is there a limitation to that? Where would you say the strength is? Power.
I don't think it limits us at all. I think it amplifies that which we want to see in the world by leading by example and by being. And as we teach each other how we can better treat each other, how we can better move in the world where you don't need to have a zero sum game, you allow yourself and others to rise to that occasion, to rise to that aspirational civilization, and you inspire others to want to be that way too. Now, it doesn't mean that you go out and give out all your profits and it doesn't mean that you just become some kind of, saint that is coming now almost from ego, if you look at it, because you're still living in this world. You're still needing to provide for your family. You still need to, have ROI for your investors and a good well-being for your employees and excellent customer service for your customers and your clients. It's part of it. It's part of it. So yes, it might make it a little bit more difficult when some actors or some players from a game theory standpoint are living through a lens of dog eat dog, zero sum, which is why you also protect yourself and you protect your company and you protect your employees and your investors. You do all that. And on top of that, you still try to lead the way with an open heart, but a strong back. It's essentially, and I heard that from, I forgot her name, but it was such a beautiful way to put that. Essentially, yes, it's a little bit more difficult because not only do you have to adhere by the rules that are being played now to a certain degree, and also moving us a tick higher, just a notch higher in
Mhm.
whatever ways you can, in whatever ways that make sense to do so.
Yeah.
Um,
And you've been at this work for some time, and you talked about how, so you've kind of shared with us how you bring this into the workplace, or your employees, your investors, your partner. And I agree with you. I mean, it's so important. How does this now tie into your family? I mean, is this something you learned from your family, and you've just kind of sharing it with them? I mean, how has this changed any of your family dynamics?
yeah, I mean, I would say that the biggest thing was when I started become more aware of this aspect of life and myself. I did go back to my family and I asked that we be a real family, and they were,
What do you mean by that?
yeah, that's how they answered it. So they're like, "We are a family. We're already hanging out and do all these things." And I'm like, "Yes, sort of, but we don't really know each other. We don't really commune with each other. It's just kind of very surface level." And that's kind of what you look at as far as like the business world is it's always transactional, surface level, and not always, but for the most part, it's kind of superficial when we can actually have deep bonds just as we would any other way. I mean, if you look at back in the day, at the start of our civilization and our species, we had those bonds, and those bonds informed how we moved. Now it's been removed in a way systematically where you don't see each other as much. You can just order stuff online. You can not say hi to, a cashier because now it's all, you you do your self checkout, and like now we're just systematically removing ourselves from the flow and the ecosystem that is supposed to be business, economy, finance. Like those are still of nature. We've just unnaturalized them
Mhm.
by removing ourselves two, three, four standard, 2, 3 standard deviations out. Now, can we come back and do that? So one thing that I decided to is, where do I start? Do I start with the whole U.S. economy? No, I start with myself and my family, right? Who's the closest people. And, we started having weekly meetings when I told him, hey, I would ask my brother, hey, what's my dad's most aspirational, self? Or my mother, what does your daughter think of at night? Or what does she worry about? And essentially, when we saw that there was a gap, that we can fill that gap and we can be active and participatory in this movement of deepening our relationships, that's where it started to come about. And I'll say that it wasn't pretty at the beginning. There's a lot of stories, there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of things that, you know, we kind of hold on to, some intentionally, some unintentionally. And those are the lenses from which we observe each other. So my perspective is different from my brother's perspective, is different from my sister's perspective of our parents, based on their own evolution and their own, how they acted within each other's relationships. So creating some kind of coherence to start with, so that we can kind of align, means that we bring up the hard stuff first. At first I even thought I messed up by trying to do this. It is, at each other and not in a good position, and then, you did this and I did, and blah blah blah, and it's like, whoa. But if you think about it, that's just cleaning the slate. Let's level this out and let's build the foundation again, because it's unleveled. There's things that have been unsaid. So you create enough space to allow all that gunk to come out, to move, and then you start replacing it with the things that you do want to have between each other. That love, that care, that listening, and now all that comes through grace, right? Do you blame your parents when they were, young, 19, 20, 21 years old, when they had you, for treating you a certain way? Or do you have compassion, understanding that they were young and kids themselves, raising other kids, and, or, being able to have the ability to reconcile and really give each other the space to just fall apart and get back up together? Because just as we distribute love, we can also distribute the weight that we all carry. So if you can carry that weight with your mom and your dad and your siblings, and they can carry yours, the load isn't as hard and as heavy anymore, because
Mm.
you're doing it together. So how does that translate to then business and the world is exactly that, are now not separate from your employees. You're not separate from their families. They're not separate from your investors. You're not separate from your clients, right? When you start moving in this way and viewing the world through this lens, you stop poisoning the rivers. You stop taking advantage of others, right? You stop playing those game theory games of, where you start removing uh, or extracting systematically from others, but instead try to find an all-win situation, an omni-win situation for everybody, and not only people, but our environment. You know, it's not just shareholders, but all stakeholders, while not forgetting shareholders too, right?
Mm. Yeah.
It's important. You don't leave anybody behind. It's all of us together, which requires that there's a revolution in our own being, in our own consciousness, in our own creations as we move through the world, through our business and through creating our reality, because that is what we're doing constantly. We are constantly creating our reality, and we together are creating our reality. Even this conversation, you know, if one, two people listen to this and are able to shift how they approach business or their family or life, then it would have all been worth it right there. Just that one person, because it's the amplification effect, and it's at some point that's how the evolution of consciousness moves, where you create a critical mass enough to say, maybe slavery isn't the best and we can do better, right? Like, maybe this isn't the best, maybe we can do better. And that's the beauty of our species and our collective consciousness, where we can all kind of attune to it and say, yeah, as a collective, we don't think that these wars are actually solving anything, and they're coming out of the neurosis of just a few individuals. And actually, there's very, very smart people that can work on this. And now with the advent of AI, at a breaknecking speed. And so it's all still up to us how we decide to move forward and from where we operate. That's always my question. When I say something, I ask myself, who said that right now? What part of me said this? Was it my ego? Was it somebody that's actually trying to be compassionate and understanding? Or is it just because I'm trying to get what's mine or whatever, right? And in my family, we do this now. We don't call each other out. We call each other in. We call in and say, where did you just speak from? Was that your head, your heart, you know, your soul? Where are we speaking from? Where are we acting from? And would you like to try that again? Right? If somebody says something sharp to another, hey, that felt a little bit sharp to me. Should we try that again? Leave the shame, leave the blame, leave the judgment, the guilting, leave that all at the door and invite grace, love, compassion, empathy into our conversations, into any situation.
Yeah.
And that itself is the act of evolution right there. It might seem small, like I want to change the world. I want to do all these great big things, but the macro is only comprised of all those little micro movements, conversations, situations. And if you want to change the world, you change it with how you approach every single individual, every single conversation. And I know we're not perfect at it. I'm certainly not. I mess up a lot, and I have to come back and apologize, and I get to repair with the people that have given me enough grace to say, yep, that was not the best. And I understand you because I'm like you too. And therefore, moving forward, we could do it this way. That is everything right there. That
Yeah.
is everything right there.
Yeah. Maybe getting closer to answering that question of why are we all here, which will come back full circle to that. But wow, everything that you're talking about, I mean, is so important. It resonates so much with me. It's a journey that I've kind of been on my whole life, but really kind of being more aware of it and being more intentional about it, in just a couple of years. This process that you kind of went through, it's funny that we kind of both had the experience of political science, and I thought the same thing. I actually thought I wanted to be mayor of the city that I lived in, eventually maybe becoming governor. And then I had some experiences that, like you said, you see how the sausage is made. One thing I'll just share was I was running for a small position, small office position, and there was a PAC that was funding a couple of different candidates. I was a potential candidate and they declined me. They don't know that I heard them say this, but because I was supposed to, but I heard them say that I wasn't Mexican enough. I wasn't Mexican enough to get the votes. On paper, everything looked great. Resume was great, but just wasn't Mexican enough. Anyways, I always thought, why? And after that, I started kind of doing some reflection. I started thinking, why am I going to focus on helping this big community, all these people, when I need to get my own life in order. I need to figure out my own self. And I love that you kind of started with that. Even in this conversation, especially, you started with yourself, moving on to your family. Um, and now your family has kind of adopted this new process, which is so beautiful. It's ancestral, right? I mean, I just get this image of what families used to look like thousands of years ago, right? Everything was interconnected. There was there was no separation. It was a family unit. You talk, you share stories together, you support each other. There's a lot of care that goes into that. And now we live in the society where you hear things like employers say, I really appreciate and value my employees. And then there's this part of me that when I hear that, I think, really? Do you? We both know this person, Julian Guterly. I interviewed him a while ago. And when one of our conversations, I asked him, how are you? And he says, do you really want to know? Because he was sharing I think it's in Germany or something. Ask somebody, how are you? It's because you want to know how they're doing. Here in the US, if I ask, how are you? I don't want to hear the whole story of what's going wrong in your life and why you're sad. I want to know, yeah, it's good, and if it's bad, maybe keep it at like, yeah, I've had better days, right? And so what we're talking about is really it's more than fundamental. It's to our core being, right? It's bringing people together. I love this idea, and I wrote it down: the calling in as opposed to calling out. This totally makes sense in how it connects to business, how we can be even more successful. Not that success and more wealth should be the aspiration, but that can certainly come from living this way and approaching things this way. I can just imagine the relationships that you're building and strengthening along the way. You're also attracting those kinds of relationships as well because of the trust and togetherness that people feel when they're few. So now your family's kind of bought it, and it sounds like it was a process. How long did that take, by the way, to kind of integrate? And actually, the question I wanted to ask earlier is, did you just kind of think of this on your own? Did you have a guide? Did you read a book that said, hey, maybe you should try this with your family?
Well, it took years. It's hard when we have a lot of layers of protection and a lot of layers of defense, guarding our heart, guarding, ourselves. And holding on to the hurt and holding on to the judgments and all these things that occurred between us that can take time. So, I'm sure every family is different. And as I've learned throughout these years, because we've been doing this for 8 years now, I think, so 7 or 8 years. Now I can move faster with this, whether it's in business or with, new relationships or whatever. Now I know the different strategies or like, codes, whatever you want to call them, to be able to do that. At the same time, it's important to know the kind of culture we want to create. So I didn't read this in a book. I didn't, nobody told me how to do this. I would finish our meetings and then I'd go on long walks and saying, what is it here that we're creating? How would we like to move? And then come back to them and say, what kind of family do you want to be? A lot of times we don't talk about like, how do we want to interact? How often? What is the protocol for when somebody's in a situation that's difficult? What's the protocol when somebody's birthday? Literally, like, speak about it. Everything that you can talk about, right? So as far as like generational wealth, what's being able to bring in all the different generations and sitting down and whatever helps all of the generations to create calibration and coherence so that the succession is co-created and beautifully designed from each and every person and each and every generation. So that's what I would say is important. And like I said, we are actively creating our culture. We can, in our being, we can sit there and just adopt somebody else's culture and adopt somebody else's way of being, or we can say, what would be the most beautiful way our family could live? What would be the most beautiful way our friendships could be? What would be the most beautiful way our business relationships could be?
And this is beyond just choosing values. Like this is what we like. I hear a lot of families talk about, like, oh, I have these values. These
Yeah.
are important to us. These are our beliefs. What you're talking about is more of a this is how we operate, right? This is our operation system.
Yes.
Putting those core values into action, but meticulously, like every single detail. Like what happens when we go astray from these values? How do we come back? What's the process
Yes.
of coming back? Right.
Exactly, exactly. So those are the little micro corrections, the little like, hey, let's go back to the drawing board. It seems like we wanted this, but we can't implement it. Something is off, maybe. Let's go back and let's work on this together. When we start putting ourselves on the one side of the table and putting the problem or situation at the other side of the table, that's when we can get start solving it together versus when we're one person has an opinion and the other person has an opinion and now everybody takes sides. That's just our natural animal human instinct, right? To in this dualistic existence that we have, light and dark, right and wrong, and all these kind of, how would you call it, the infrastructure of this existence. You have that duality, but at the same time, you are not just this existence. You're not just this physical being, right? There's something clearly outside of us. And this is where I would say we are both animal and we are spirit. We are both sides. So can you blend those aspects of yourself, so that you can have something that works for your animal self and your spiritual self and everybody else's as well. And so that's where I mean by creating confluence and creating coherence truly from being, not from, like you said, a nice plaque that says something. Listening to your children. What is actually important to them? How do they feel seen? How do they feel loved? Not how you think they feel seen, or how you think. Just because you receive love in certain ways doesn't mean they receive love in the same way.
Yeah.
So it's like pausing and being still enough to observe them and their nature, like
Mhm.
quite literally in their nature, not putting your ideas, not putting your thoughts and what do you think their life should be, or of course you care about them, of course you want to direct them in the right way, and that's good, that's important, but you don't do it by force, you do it by invitation, right? You don't It's same thing with business, like you don't try to corner people into things and manipulate them into things, and you don't coerce or like give them a hurry up now, or it's never going to be all that those are just tactics, and they don't respect the innate wisdom that lives inside of us, and so therefore people, whether subconsciously or consciously, they
Yeah.
feel that, and of
Yeah.
course it doesn't feel good to be tricked into things, or rushed into things, versus just coming with your own presence, your own slowness, and your own beingness, and allowing them to tap into theirs.
Yeah. But Yehuel, I mean, you're talking about something so beautiful, but this is a lot of work. I'm saying this kind of jokingly, but to somebody listening to this, because as you know, I'm in wealth management and I deal with a lot of families, and most families I work with want the same thing. They want harmony, they want togetherness, they want generational wealth. That's a huge topic, legacy. And you and I both know that most wealth is lost after the second generation for a variety of reasons. My argument is, yeah, this is the hard work. This is how we can, and not just transfer wealth from one generation to the other, but I love how one client actually put it. They said, I want to transfer wealth for multiple generations, but I'm not thinking about wealth purely in the form of money. I'm thinking of wealth as information, as they didn't quite say it like in the way of being, how we're talking about now. They expressed it a little bit differently, but that was sort of their meaning was,
Hmm.
how can I instill these? They used the word values, but they meant it more depth than what we typically hear. But this is the work, right? It's not easy, because in a way we almost have to kind of. It almost feels like we're going against the grain a little bit. My kids, for example, it's so much easier to um, manipulate, put an iPad to gain compliance, give time on the TV. negative reinforcement. If you don't do this, then that sort of thing. And yet, I constantly remind myself that there are families, even today, in other parts of the world where they're still following cultural patterns that have existed for thousands of years. And you look at those children and those parenting styles, and you don't hear the parents saying, "Hey, make sure you're doing the dishes." No, kids just wake up, they start doing chores because it's just a way of being, right? They just learn it. You see the elders, teaching the children, being patient with them, allowing them to kind of make mistakes, and it's more like an invitation. Hey, join me in folding this clothes if you want. Sure, you're going to do it your own way and kind of screw around. And if you get bored, go play or whatever. But it's more of an invitation than forcing an outcome that we're wanting. The vision, and I don't know. This kind of brings me into what we see in social media and in movies, and we have this idealistic version of what life ought to be, when we know truly that what we're really seeking is just harmony, love, and connection. So yeah, this is hard work. We're digging in, we're digging deep, and then challenging ourselves with having the rest of our family join us in this work. Because it's one thing for you to have done this all on your own and asking all these philosophical questions about life and humanity, but then to invite your family into it and then practice it together. And it's comforting to hear that it took years and it didn't just take 6 months. The reality is it's hard work and you kept at it. That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah, definitely. I would say you're right on. You're spot on. I mean, it's not easy. It, a woman birthing a child is not easy, right? I can't even imagine that, but it does not seem easy at all, right? Bringing something from nothing is not easy, right? Like all these things that life brings us that are worth doing are not easy, and our wanting to grasp at easy is only our smaller self, not allowing our most abundant, fullest selves to take the reins and move forward. Now we do it in some aspects of our lives. A lot of people that have created their wealth and their businesses and sold their companies or IPO'd and things like that, they've done it that way, realm and that aspect. Now go do that in your family. Now go do that in your relationships. Try doing that one, right? Like and you already succeeded in something great, amazing. Now you have something a challenge that is of equal or greater value and challenge to work at. Now it's all framing. You can look at it as a chore and like, oh, I gotta get my kids to do this and they never listen and blah blah. Or you can be like, I get to sit here and really, really figure them out in their complete everythingness and find coherence between us somewhere, somehow. That again is moving from instead of like a chore to like an inspirational thing. You aspire to do that, right? And so to me, it's like, yes, it is work. Yes, it's not easy. And yet the reward of it, the fact that I can go to my family and my father, who barely spoke any words to me as a child because he was working two jobs and overnight because that's what bakers do, who didn't speak two words for me and to me, like when we were young, now can come and say, my heart is heavy or I'm feeling sad because of this. I'm like, it just, it's a whole different person and yet the same person, and, being able to be honest with each other when we're in difficult situations to allow each other to carry each other instead of resorting to drugs or alcohol or other things that might not be good for the individual. The fact that we have that, man, that is worth it. That is worth doing.
Yeah.
It's totally worth doing. And, if anybody listening, actually, if they ever want to give me a call or email and want tips on this, like to me, this is the biggest thing I've ever done is have this beautiful family dynamic that I never thought I could actually have. I didn't even think I could have this. I wake up every morning and I'm grateful for my life. I'm grateful for my house and my friends, but I'm so grateful for my family and how we move through things together. And if I can be of service in that, you are helping me refine that too for myself. And that's what I mean by being able to be there, not as separate individuals, as seeing each other as oneself.
Yeah. And you're helping me in this process. I mean, this is why I do these conversations, right? They're important to me, and I probably get the most benefit than anybody because I get to hear from people like you. Earlier, you mentioned how there's different throughout life. You know, there's different stages, there's different versions of you, and when you look forward, there could be a trillion iterations of what you could be. And this is honing in on one, and then having that kind of be like your north star, right? Who's that person now when you think into the future? You know, as you think about looking forward, you know, you've already accomplished a lot in life and in business and personal growth and family. What's next for you? Who is it that you want to become?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I would I want to add a suggestion. So I don't say become, I say becoming because
Becoming.
because I am a verb. I am moving through time and space, and there's not a end point. It's just a continuous rebirth of myself over and over again. So who I am becoming at the core is I am becoming the love that I want to see in the world, and that permeates through every aspect of my life, through every relationship, through every conversation. And when it doesn't, it informs me to how I can be that aspirational self, how I can bring it forward more because I know that I deviated. So I am grateful for the deviation. I am grateful for the learning because it informed me to how I can have more coherence and to move towards that aspirational self as I am becoming.
So becoming more outwardly, right? Infinitely in every direction. What you're describing it reminds me a lot of when I first started practicing meditation. I used to think that meditation, when I first started doing it, I thought meditation was supposed to go perfectly. Like, oh, I'm supposed to like clear my mind and not think about anything. And we're both laughing because it's just no. I mean, that's part of the meditation. The goal isn't to clear your mind. The goal is to be aware of what's happening in your mind and then come back to the practice, right? I always think of it almost kind of like a freeway and cars on a freeway, traffic, you know, cars going by. There's a thought. I can follow that thought and kind of get lost in it, or I can just come back, you know. And it's being grateful for this opportunity to realize I'm still growing and I get to come back and practice something new. I get to refine this small little detail. It's no different than somebody at a gym that's, I don't know, in a bodybuilding competition and noticing like, oh, yep, this micro muscle on the back here. I still need to work on that one.
Mm.
Special technique that I gotta get to that one, and it's hard, but I'm gonna build that muscle. In a way, it is building a muscle. It's a life skill. And thank you for that correction. You're absolutely right. I think and this is part of my practice as well, is even just thinking of changing the way I not think about it, but the way I express it. Because you're right, and I know that inherently that we will never arrive. There is no arrival of just continuing to evolve as people, as human beings. As we're wrapping up our conversation here, you know, question I'd like to ask you, and I ask of everybody who kind of joins us. Actually, before I get to that, one question that's important. A lot of people listening to this call are founders, business owners. That's traditionally the group of people that I work with. A lot of them are also have families. Some of them don't, but maybe one day want to have a family. But one thing that a lot of people I work with have in common is they want to build success without losing themselves in the process. They don't want to be owned by their business, and yet they still want to be successful to provide and all these things. For somebody who's maybe new to this, right? What would you recommend they start with, right? In order to get in the habit, get in the practice, I guess, of what we're talking about here, because this is a big topic, and there's a lot of complexity. It's a lot of hard work, as we explained. But where would be one place that you would recommend they start?
Well, everybody has their own journey. I could only share with people my own journey and what has helped me. I think the first thing that I would say is most of us live and operate in the world through one dimension of ourselves, and that dimension is the mental state, our mind. And as such, we construct an entire universe based only on thoughts and mind and constantly thinking, thinking, doing, thinking, instead of being able to pause, take a breath, take a step back and say, Am I only my thoughts? Am I only these things that continuously I need to figure this out or figure that out? Yes, that is important. Yes, that is what puts food on the table. Yes, that's what helps us navigate the world. Otherwise you can tell the difference between your car and somebody else's car in the parking lot. But it's not the only aspect of yourself. So being able to find time to slow down and be thoughtless for a while, or at least let those thoughts, like you said, not be the main stage holders, allows you to tap in a deeper aspect of yourself. And if you really think about it and feel about it, is a lot of the people that have shifted this world, they tap into these deeper aspects of themselves. It does then come through the mind after they tap in, but they now have the raw material that then transmutes into the world and moves into the world, into the physical, into the thought. I would say being able to create enough space where you're just not constantly in your mind gives you that ability, gives you that opportunity. And the more that you practice it, whether it's just like you said, going on a hike, or, one of the things that I like to do is swim every other day, swim 20, 30 minutes. Yeah, you kind of are just in flow. And I'm sure, that's akin to being in flow for work as well. But what I'm saying is there's a state where you're not constantly doing, doing, doing. It's more like you're being in the doing. And it might sound a little woo, but it there is some truth to that if you investigate it. And I always say, don't take my word or some textbook or somebody else's word for it. You go investigate it. You go do that and see what actually brings about more fundamental truths and understandings about yourself, and how that understanding then changes your thoughts, changes your experience of life, changes your experience of the world. And now you see this feedback back pretty clearly enough to say, yeah, I need this space in order to bring about everything that I want to bring about. And that gives me a more holistic approach to my life where I don't sacrifice my family. I don't sacrifice, the time that I have with my kids who only get to be kids for a little bit.
Yeah.
And the world still goes on and the sun still rises. It's just how attached are you to your thoughts and the neurosis that moves throughout the world, because the mind is doing what it needs to do. The mind is a beautiful machine. I'm not demonizing it here at all. It's actually excellent over millennia of evolution. It's doing what it needs to do, which is finding food, shelter, replication, right? All these things that it needs to do, and it's doing it well, and it's looking out for you and looking out for your family. It's looking out for what it needs because it needs to, right? Make sure it survives and replicates. So it's doing what it needs to do, and that's great. But the total you,
Mhm.
you the source
The
you,
spirit. Yeah.
the spirit behind it, let that run, kind of like you let run AI do its thing until you come back, and then that's done. You can do the same thing here. You can say, hey, go figure this out for me. I'm not going to be so identified with you 24/7, day and night, that I can't sleep, that I can't eat, that I can't pay attention to my kids. It's going to do it whether you're present with it or not, because it's such a beautiful machine. It's such a beautiful design. Look at it. Look at, we still haven't been able to replicate this mind, this brain, right? Like, seeing it that way, where you're not so identified with it, allows you then to make space for other feelings, other, states of being. And eventually you get to sleep like a baby and you get to experience your children's tantrums as beautiful. I know it sounds weird, but you will be able to get to that because you're not so identified. It's all about how much am I clutching to these thoughts and these ideas, or how much, it's like the same thing as, like, I don't know who said this, but like you're grasping at water, you're not going to grab it, but if you make a cup and you let it sit there, then you can drink from it. It's the same thing here, right? Don't get so identified with the mind that it becomes your persona. It becomes all that you are instead of the totality that you are. I think what you said was so good about one of your clients, which I totally agree with, is there's multiple dimensions of wealth and there's multiple dimensions of value. And when we get so fixated, kind of like we get fixated on our thoughts, we become myopic. And we don't realize that there's so many dimensions to wealth: time wealth, presence wealth, right? Like there's wealth that experience, right? Like you get to experience something that, otherwise you would have let go of because you're so myopic in this one thing,
Yeah.
right? And I get it. We have stages of development, which is like survival and then this and then that. I get that. And at the same time, once you've moved out of survival, you don't have to stay in survival. But our mind is still in that just in case. And you thank it. Thank you, mind, for still taking care of us. I'll let you sleep on that. I'm gonna go to sleep. You do that, and then in the morning you can tell me what we need to do. But I'm not gonna sit there and sit next to you while you're figuring it out and identifying myself so much with it while you're figuring it out, because you will figure it out, and I'm just gonna rest. And that's the key. Like that's literally whatever helps you get there. Try different things. Iterate. That's what we do as business owners and entrepreneurs and investors. We iterate.
And there's I'm sure there's courses, there's retreats, there's all kind of spiritual leaders that can help with this. But essentially, kind of what you're saying is, I've heard, I think it was my last guest that said this. He calls it the genius moment, is creating enough space between you and the business to be able to think about not just the business, but how you're operating it, to visualize, invite curiosity and creativity, maybe ask questions. Is this how we ought to be doing things? Right. So it's maybe step one is create enough space, enough time. And this usually comes from pressure. I usually see this come at a point where I see a founder or a business owner start saying they're feeling burnt out or they're starting to lose what the purpose is of life. Yes, I have wealth. Yes, I have all of this, but the things that are actually really important to me, I'm now losing grasp of, right? I focused so much on trying to provide for my, like I had another guest that talked about how he was building so much wealth, focusing so much on providing for his family that it was never really there for his family,
Hmm.
and so there's people, and that is, so there's a pressure point usually. Hopefully we can get there before that pressure happens, but essentially is allowing enough space and time. Funny things, space and time, that's another conversation, but allowing enough space and time to invite curiosity and having this genius moment. And there's many different modalities, like you said, could be hiking, swimming. On this retreat that I went, did another experimented with this. I've done hiking, I've done meditation. I wanted to experiment with something new, so I made a reservation at a pretty nice restaurant for just me. And I sat there at the dinner table with there was groups and families and friends, and everyone's kind of eating, and I'm just kind of there on my own, quiet, just observing. My question that I had for myself is, what was I missing before when I wasn't able to have this much awareness in this space, right? And it was really interesting what came to me. But there's so many modalities, there's so many ways that you can invite this space and curiosity. But essentially, from what I'm getting is start with that, start with curiosity, start with space.
Exactly.
The last question I want to ask is this series is called Life First Conversations. What to you is life? What does life first mean to you?
To me, what comes up is we put the totality of our existence on the back burner for very myopic, one dimensional things, and it could be anything. It could be money, it could be status, it could be whatever you're looking for that supersedes and overrides everything else. But the thing about it is, at the end of your life, everything else is what really gave you joy and gave you experiences and the feeling of love and being loved, the feeling of being appreciated and appreciating, the feeling of grace and giving grace, like all these things that you can't even explain with words sometimes. They don't come from that myopic single point of view. They come from the totality that is you and that is around you, right? So if you can sit there and really take in life in its totality with all its swings and roller coaster rides, and but not as a passive actor, but totally immersed and in presence of your fears and your laughters, of your worries and your most beautiful memories. Then you have taken in life completely. Then you have taken life to its most purest essence.
It's no wonder when people are asked, There's this kind of a playful question that you sometimes hear asked, and it's if you had 3 months left to live or 6 months left to live, what would you do? And some people jokingly might say like, I'd travel and do all these luxurious things. But when people take the question seriously, I think most people usually come back to, I want to spend it in nature. I want to be with my family. I want to be with my loved ones. I don't want to judge. I don't want to criticize. They don't say these things, but that's what they envision. They envision
Hmm.
this sense of everything you just talked about, getting grace, receiving and giving grace, receiving and giving love. Um, this wholeness, this kind of completeness. I always get this visualization of myself, maybe near a beach, hearing the waves crash, having my kids around me, allowing them to play and just be children, not having an attachment to needing anything, but knowing that I have everything at the same time is beautiful. And I think that's at the end of the day what we all seek. And that's how everything's connected. Business and
Exactly. Yeah. So it's all connected. You cannot separate one thing from the other. When we do that, we create fragmentation, which fragments our own mind, which fragments our own self. And then we have this feedback loop of fragmentation and disassociation. So if you can move with tremendous attention to yourself, to your inner state, to your feelings, to your mind, sometimes you just need to drink some more water, literally. If you can pay attention to that degree, then you see how all those other things kind of subside and only the most important things come to light.
Well, I am definitely going to be rewatching this episode with my wife. I think this was really special. I was really looking forward to having this conversation. I'm glad that we did it, and I know there'll be more to come. You mentioned if people want to reach out, and thank you for making yourself available. If somebody does want to reach out, even just to say thanks or hey, I connected with something you said, how should they reach out to you? What's the best way?
They can find me on social media. Usually it's just Yehuel or Yehuel Larios. And my email address too could be yehuel.larios@gmail.com. That's jehuel.larios
I don't
And
have
I'll give
I don't have a million subscribers yet, so I mean, I don't think you're gonna be bombarded by people, but good to know.
it's all good. I mean, I'm sure if it gets too much, then I'll find a process that works.
Well, thank you again for doing this with me, having this conversation, being open and vulnerable enough to share the things that I mean, your journey, your path, where you're at today, who you're becoming, your thoughts. They're very inspirational, very inspirational to hear. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Miguel. Appreciate you for having me.
Thank you.